Okay, so I wasn't sure we needed to make this video, but I think we do if we want to understand the man, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, beyond 1842, 1843. Are you ready for some drama? Because there's going to be some drama. Okay, so if you watched my previous video called Who Was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, you know that Longfellow went through this real grief in the mid-1830s. He's in Copenhagen, he's in Scandinavia, studying Scandinavian languages, preparing to be a Harvard professor of modern languages. He's with his wife, who is pregnant. Well, she miscarries very tragically, and then from complications, she dies. And in his grief, the next year, he spends time in Germany and meets a young girl named Frances Appleton. She's on vacation with her family. Turns out she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he's about to move. They hit it off, become great friends. There's no indication that there was anything romantic between them. They were just good friends. He was a few years older than her, but she was very intelligent. They discussed German literature together. We went over all of this in the last video. But I want to talk about what happens in more detail when they get back to America. So when they get back to America, Henry thinks, hey, this might be someone I could kind of rebuild my life with. And he makes it pretty clear to Frances that he's interested in friendship plus. She makes it pretty clear to him that she's not really interested in anything more than friendship. I want to read to you from Longfellow's writing to a friend of his around this time. So Longfellow he's pretty bold. He thinks that maybe he can convince her that she maybe wants to be more than friends with him. So he says this. This is in winter 1837, 1838. He's writing to his friend George Green, who he was very, very close with and very frank with. He says this. This glorious, beautiful being, a woman not of talent but of genius, indeed a most rare, sweet woman, whose name is Fanny Appleton. You saw her at Greenborough's studio. You cannot have forgotten her. Tall with a pale face. Well, that pale face is my fate. Horrible fate it is too, for she lends no favorable ear to my passion, and for my love gives me only friendship. I shall win this lady, or I shall die. He's not holding back in how he feels about Frances Appleton. And what's curious is, he sounds so bold here, but it turns out his actual actions are not so bold. He, after being assured by winter into spring 1838 that she's not interested in him, he goes to parties at their house and kind of hangs around. Someone's having a get-together he knows she'll be at. He shows up, but he watches her from more and more of a distance and realizes she's one of the most eligible young ladies in New England, and she has a great family. Her brother, Tom Appleton, Longfellow was friends with, and he realizes, look, it's not going to work out. And Frances makes clear she's not going to give him any opportunity to repress his suit. There's no chinks in her armor. He's not going to win her. So this, as we mentioned in the last video, leads Longfellow into a re-examination of what's important. He writes poems like A Psalm of Life, where he says, let the dead past bury the dead, act in the living present, heart within and God o'erhead. Basically saying, okay, that's in the past now, I'm moving on. But he wasn't really moving on, and this is where the drama increases. He's working on a novel about a young man who has just had someone he loves die, who goes to Germany to get over his grief and experience Europe. He meets an American girl named Mary Ashburton. This guy's name is Paul Fleming. And they strike up a friendship. Paul falls deeply in love with Mary, but Mary doesn't return his affection. And Paul, by the end of the book, has to decide, I'm going to live on even though she unjustly has rejected me. Longfellow publishes this book in 1839. All of Boston, all of Cambridge, all of New England reads it, and everybody knows it's actually about Frances Appleton. Frances Appleton herself reads it and sees he's writing our experience. He's airing our dirty laundry in public. Longfellow got a lot of blowback from this, and in fact, it kind of almost harmed his writing career because the novel's fine, it's whatever, it's no Jane Eyre. He's going for a very melodramatic fiction style. He wasn't very good at that style. He was much better at kind of more comic portraitures in his fiction. And most people encourage him writing poetry and not so much writing fiction. So he blows it, and this seems to be the final nail in the coffin, that he's not going to win her. He tried writing a thinly veiled autobiographical novel about her. It's not going to work, dude. Just give it up. He stops attending anything she's at. He's done. His health starts to suffer. He's doing well as a Harvard professor. He's publishing great poems into the 1840s, like The Village Blacksmith, poems that will become indelible in the American canon. And yet his health is deteriorating. He suffered from eye strain, he suffered from toothaches, he was weak, and finally he has a doctor basically say, look, you gotta go get healthy. This doctor sends him to this interesting facility in Germany that does what they call a water cure, where they have people basically bathe in cold icy German rivers and stand under really cold waterfalls, and it's supposed to heal them. Longfellow's a little skeptical about this, but he goes, and he seems pretty refreshed by it. He stays there for a few weeks. He spends some time with the young Charles Dickens in London talking about slavery and abolition. We should do a Longfellow and abolition video at some point, get into that. He comes back to America kind of charged up about things that have nothing to do with Fanny Appleton, nothing to do with romance. He wants to support the abolitionist cause. He gets connected with Frederick Douglass. It looks like he's moving away from seeking to be a husband and a father. That's not in the cards for him. Weirdly, though, on April 13th of 1843, he gets an invitation to a going-away party for Tom Appleton at the Appletons' house. Now, as I mentioned before, Tom, he's the older brother of Frances. They called her Fanny, Frances Fanny. And he goes to support Tom. Tom's moving away, moving out of town. He's just going there for Tom. He actually wrote in a letter earlier that he goes to parties now to dance with older women because the younger women don't seem to have good taste. It's a real dig at both Frances and her generation. Anyway, he goes to this party. He's supporting Tom. He's avoiding Frances because the dead past is buried. Frances pulls him aside and tells him, in no uncertain terms, that she's going to be real lonely now that her brother's gone, and he should, quote, come and comfort her. Longfellow, as Cifelli uses the term dazed and confused, Longfellow kind of stumbles home from the party, writes her a note like a day later saying, sure, I'll come and see you. Like, do you really want me to come and see you? I'm real confused. I'm open to reconnecting if you are. And she writes him back this passionate letter where she quotes his own poetry to him and says, I hope we can let the dead past bury its dead and seek a brighter future, or something like that. What has changed in her? Well, we don't know a whole lot about what changed for Frances, but one of the things that Cifelli and others have talked about is, in 1836, 1837, she's a teenager still. He's in his mid-20s. She's, 18, 19, 20 years old. It seemed that life was ahead of her. 6 years later, she's in her mid-20s. He's in his 30s. And people think that maybe she mellowed in her expectations and also saw maybe Longfellow for who he was when he wasn't chasing her. And her father had gotten remarried. She ended up as sort of a stepsister to much younger siblings, and she thought, it's time. They were engaged within a week of this reuniting at Tom's going away party, and they were married by fall of that year. So I'm happy to say that all this romantic drama, from friendship in Germany to flirting, one-sided flirting at soirees across New England, to this horribly cringy novel that he publishes, to saying, oh, I'm done with you, I'm going to go on and make my mark on American history, to this out of the blue party where she says, hey, come hang out with me. I love this story, and I think it's in the background of a lot of the romances that we're going to see in Longfellow's writing after this. So I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down the more private affairs of Francis Appleton and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and continue to join us as we work through Longfellow's heroines and his life story. Thanks. I'm Dr. Timothy Bartell.